Okay, good evening. 8 o'clock on a little bit later than 8 o'clock, but Tuesday night. And I hope wherever you are, you're safe and your loved ones are well. That guess we could dedicate the Shia to the healing of the world, that the world should be healed and whatever's happening should resolve quickly so that we can live a new and a better reality. And what I want to do is I want to stay on schedule. I want to be able to give this class once a week. I want to speak about the Parsha, and obviously things will come up about what's going on in our personal lives or what's going on in the world as we recognize our interconnectedness. And I know probably people are overloaded with online classes, so, maybe it'll last an hour, maybe it won't, but I wanted to share some thoughts about this week's Torah portion. So we are beginning the new book. We finished the book of Exodus, and we're now beginning the book of Leviticus, which is known as Vayikra. And the beginning sentence of this week's Torah portion speaks about God calling to Moses. So last week, at the end of last week's Torah portion, we understood that God settled his presence. He came. There was a more of a sense of God in the tabernacle that the Jewish people had constructed in the desert. That God had given them specific directions how to build a mishkan, how to build a tabernacle. And God says that the presence of God will reside there. There'll be more God presence there. And we spoke last week a little bit about what it means to recognize God in our lives, recognize God in our world. So, the Mishkan that was traveled with the Jewish people through the desert was a place where there was a sense that God resides here. And we spoke last week about how all our synagogues are closed down, all our places to congregate, all our places to come together have closed. And so perhaps one of the things we could think about, as well as having a place to go, is to recognize our own inner work, to come to a place to acknowledge our own soul, to acknowledge our own spirituality, to somehow tap into what's inside of us. On some level, it might be easy to go to the synagogue. It might be easy to go to the study hall and sort of like expect something to come to you. Like if I go there, I'll receive something. But this is work. We have to work to have a relationship to the divine, to have a relationship to our own soul, to have a relationship to who we are as a coupling of body and soul. And I don't know if I gave this idea over last week, but I want to say it now because I think it really something I've been thinking about a lot. And it is about the mortality that we are all facing. We're facing on some global level our own fragility, our own sense that we're not going to live forever, that we're all going to die. We all know that intellectually, we know that. But now there's this added level of like, perhaps it's going to come to my house, perhaps it's going to come to my community, perhaps it's going to come here. And there's a fear level, there's a fear of death. There's a fear that I'm going to get it, I'm going to suffer, I'm going to die. And what do we do when we fear death? Like, how do we calm ourselves? How do we get to a place where maybe this fear of death and knowing that we're going to die, we're all going to die, right? We all know that. But what it means perhaps is, I don't know when that's going to be, and it might be tomorrow, it might be next week, it might please God, it'll be in 60, 70 years from now. However it's going to happen. And therefore, can we learn a lesson of how to live our lives now? Can we be in the moment? Like, we don't know what's going to be next week. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow almost. So today is what's important. Today is how I'm going to focus my mind, and I'm going to try to make my thoughts be positive. I'm going to try to work on myself. I'm going to pray more. I'm going to be more authentic in my relationships with other people. I'm going to really work to acknowledge the spiritual side of who I am, right? So there's less ability, although we have the computers, to go somewhere to distract ourselves. We're isolated. Most of us are isolated at home. And that fear of death, and that fear that what can we do with that? How do we use that to make our lives right now more meaningful and more impactful and more passionate and more whatever it is that we're going to learn from shutting down all the distractions and shutting down all the things that were taking us away from the self growth that we could be working on right now. So that's the first thing. So what happens at the beginning of this week's Torah portion? So that we learned last week about how the presence of God rested in this Mishkan. There was a sense that God was in our midst. There's a sense that God's here. Do we have a sense that God's here? This week, this Thursday, is going to be the new month of Nisan. The month of Nisan is the month of Passover, and one of the ideas, a very powerful idea that we have about each month or each holiday, is that there's an energy that exists at that time.
And Jewish time is circular, right? Yes, we're sort of, there's day 1 and day 2 and day 3, and then we have a cycle, but there's a certain energy that comes around every year. So on Yom Kippur, there's an energy of forgiveness. There's this huge energy of forgiveness that's accessible to the Jewish people, and we harness that by creating the day of Yom Kippur. God says that's the day where you shall afflict yourself, blah, blah, blah. Why? Because it's a day when there's greater energy of forgiveness. That's where God is more forgiving on that day than other days. Not that he isn't forgiving other days, but that's where we can tap into it most. So Yom Kippur is a day to tap into that energy. What's the energy we're going to get at Passover? It's an energy of redemption. It's an energy of transition. It's going from one reality to another reality. It's coming out of Egypt. It's coming out of the constraints. We talk about this every year, about how Mitzrayim, it was the constricting place, the place where the Jewish people had to learn through overt miracles. They had to learn through overt miracles that God was a God of the whole world, was in control of the whole world, could upset nature, could change the laws of nature, could do whatever he wanted, and did it in a way that the Jewish people understood that God was literally extracting them from Egypt and bringing them out into the desert to create a Jewish people that was going to receive the Torah, that was going to be able to live a life in relationship to God. And that's what we're learning. We're learning how to have a relationship, how the Jewish people are asked to have a relationship to God. How do we do that? And it's in the Torah. So we come out of Egypt, we get to Mount Sinai, we have a revelation of God, of divine. It's overwhelming. We can't survive. We literally can't survive a direct revelation. Moses goes up. He has the capacity to get really close. Like they say, he's a prophet like no other. There's no prophet like Moses ever going to be again, ever going to be somebody like Moses, who was almost angelic. He was able to go into the heavens. He was able to learn all the wisdom of the world and bring it down and teach it to us. Teach it to us. We call him Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe our teacher. One of the things that we parrot, we say it over and over again, Moses was the most humble of all men. What does it mean to be so humble? It means that he had no ego. It means that his whole mission was to do God's will. What did God want of him? How was he going to serve the Jewish people that were his flock, that he was shepherding, and connect God to those people? He was the mouthpiece for God. He was able to absorb all the lessons, all the wisdom. God gave it to him as a gift, and to go and teach this to the Jewish people. So pretty much Moses is like the mouthpiece for God. God could speak through Moses and give over the wisdom to the Jewish people. Moses goes up to Mount Sinai. He becomes angelic. He comes down. His face is shining. There's like beams of light. There's radiating light, radiating soul and spirituality coming out of his face. They can't look at him. He's too bright. He gets covered with a veil so that he can interact with the people. And at the end of last week's Torah portion, the cloud descends on the Mishkan, and everybody knows that God's presence is there. And now, in this week's Torah portion, beginning the book of Leviticus, we're in the third book. This is the core, right? It's very alluring to have narrative. We have, the creation of the world, and we have all of our foremothers and our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel and Leah. We learn of all about the stories of our ancestors. We have Moses. We have the story of the Exodus of Egypt. These stories are very compelling, and we learn them and we read them over, and they're very compelling. Now we get to the book of Leviticus, and this is the core. This is the middle book of the Torah, right? We have Genesis, Exodus, and now Leviticus. What are we learning here? And for many of the commentators, actually, this is in the Jewish educational system in the very ultra orthodox and very orthodox settings. This is the Torah portion. This is the Torah book. This is the book that is taught to little children. This book is taught to little children, and you think, why? Why wouldn't you teach them the stories first? Why are you teaching them about sacrifices and bringing animals onto the altar and teaching them this? Like, it's very dry. There's very, very little narrative in the whole book of Leviticus. Why is this taught to children? Because children are pure. Because children are not tainted. Because children are able to learn the lessons, right? It's easy for us to say, bringing a sacrifice, that's so inhumane and it's not good for the animals, and we shouldn't do that and whatever. Like, it's hard for us to relate to. It's teach it to children. Children are pure. Children are open. They'll learn. They'll listen. They'll take it in. They'll understand it. They'll take you to another level. So that's something interesting, is why it is that we teach this to children. But what is it that we're going to learn, and how can we take the lessons of the Torah portions as we keep going through the book of Leviticus? What is it that we're trying to learn? And I think that the key is how to bring godliness into our lives, how to understand that God is with us every step of the way, that God's here right now, here in this COVID-19 world that we live in, that God's with us and behind it. And it's not happening just happenstance, happens to be that there was this wet market in Wuhan, blah, blah, blah. It's tailor-made. And again, I have no idea why, and I have no idea what's going to be at the other end of this, but I really think that, from the Torah's perspective, like, these things don't come from without God's intervention. And we are moving into a month of Nisan, and Nisan is a month of miracles, and Nisan is the month of redemption. It's a month where we're going to come out of this constraints. We're going to come out into something. We're going to go from the dark to the light. That's what happened in Egypt. When the Jewish people came out from Mitzrayim, from Egypt, from the darkness of slavery into the light of revelation, into the light of having a relationship to God, they went from dark to light. That's our Jewish way. We go from night to day. Our day starts at nighttime. We start Friday night as the beginning of the Sabbath, and then we move in to the daytime. We go from dark to night. So maybe we're in a darkness now. This is a darkness, but I do really believe there'll be light at the end. But no idea how much suffering will go along the way, and how much like heartache and struggles and pain and perception of all the different things that are happening in the world. And it's even hard to wrap your head around. But if maybe there's something in our Torah that's teaching us that there's a bigger picture to all this, and we're in a thorn bush. We're literally in a thorn bush, and we don't know how to go and how to be and what to do. And so we look into the Torah and say, how do I live my life? What do I think? How am I supposed to think? Don't know the answers to that. I really don't know the answers to that. But I'm going to keep going with the Torah portion. So what does God say at the beginning? What does the Torah speak at the beginning of this week's portion of Leviticus? It says, He called to Moses, and God spoke to him from the tent of meeting. So who's him? God. God calls to Moses, and he speaks to him from the tent of meeting, and he's calling him. So the word Vayikra means to call. We translate it with Leviticus, I don't know. It means to call. He's calling him. But one of the letters that's in that word Vayikra is an Aleph. And the Aleph changes the word from you happen upon somebody to you actually make a calling. Like, I'm calling you. I didn't just happen to bump into you and now I'll talk to you. It's like God saying, I'm calling you, Moses. I have a special relationship. You have a special mission. The mission that you have is to transmit my wisdom to the Jewish people. And this little Aleph, it's so interesting that when it's written on the Torah scroll, if you look at it, even if you look in your Chumashim, in your Bibles that you have at home, you'll see that the Hebrew, the Aleph is written in a small. And that's, many of the commentators indicate, is reflective of the fact that Moses was very, very humble. He was so humble that he was uncomfortable with God calling him, right? We go back to Moses being called at the burning bush, and it was like, you don't really want me. Who am I? I can't do this. I negate myself. I don't have a sense of what it is that you want from me, that I can do that. And so Moses, over and over and over again, shows himself to be somebody who is able to negate his own ego. Like, on some level, it's like there isn't an arrogance about Moses, and yet there's also a recognition of his skill set. So being humble doesn't mean, oh, I'm nothing, I'm a wet rag, and you can do anything you want. Like, being humble really means that you recognize that your talents and who you are and what the gifts that you are given come from outside of you. I can remember one time with my with somebody saying, oh, like when people compliment other people and they say, oh, you're so beautiful, or you're so whatever, and like, you were born that way. Like, that's the way God made you, right? You say, oh yes, thank you very much. Or you can recognize, okay, well, maybe I am good looking. It doesn't matter. Like, what am I going to use that for? Like, it doesn't make you haughty. In fact, if you go back to the beginning of our Torah with Abraham and Sarah, that when there are certain places in the Torah where Abraham all of a sudden recognizes the beauty of his wife Sarah, like he didn't notice before, because he wasn't focused on that. So it's kind of interesting, like what we focus on, what we think is important. So, but the main point I wanted to bring out was that Moses is this very humble person. He's able to know what his strengths are and how to use those strengths, and to use them for the purpose of whatever it is that God wants him to do, right? He's almost like a messenger on earth for God. He's a partner with God. And on some level, that's who the angels are. The angels are these celestial beings that were created to carry out God's will. We on earth are also have the capacity to negate our own desires and our own will, to open ourselves up to this bigger picture, this bigger universe, to God, and say, what am I supposed to do? What do you want from me now? And like try to answer that. Like I don't have the answer, but in the Torah there are answers of what it means to be messengers for God. And we learn over and over again in our tradition that it means to be godlike. Who is God in the world? God is kind, God is good, God is compassionate, God is redeeming the Jewish people from Egypt, God is loving, God is feeding, God is clothing, God is burying the dead, God is doing all of these things. And our injunction to be godlike is a mission for each one of us to be godlike in our own specific ways, like how each one of us has our own calling, right? Yes, God is calling to Moses and saying, Moses, here's what I want you to speak to the children of Israel. Here's your calling. Moses is saying, I don't want to be called. I don't want to be special. I don't want to be different than the other people. So God says, okay, I'll make the aleph little, like to denote that you're minimizing yourself. You're recognizing that God is the ruler and the runner of the universe. And our desire to connect to God, is going to be found, or the guidelines, the blueprint for how to do that is in the Torah. So if it means one of the ways is to be godlike. So it says you have to be godlike, you have to bury the dead. So, by the way, shout out to people who are, I don't want to do that now. Anyway, so there are things that we do now, like when we're kind to people, when we're compassionate, when we call our neighbors, when we up our acts of kindness, however we can do that. Obviously we can't go visit the sick in the same way, but maybe we can call sick people. Maybe we can we can't pay a shiva call, but maybe we can call somebody who's sitting shiva, or whatever it is that we can do to up the acts of compassion and the acts of kindness that we do for each other. That we can do, right? And we can be more loving, we can be more aware of other people's suffering, we can cry along with other people, like be godlike, like look into the Torah. What does God do? How does God act? Be that, right? So that's one thing. Moses is manifesting God's will. He is coming down from outside. He's glowing with this inner soul energy that's coming out, and he's communicating with God from the Mishkan. So that's a portable structure that the Jewish people took with them around the 40 years of traveling in the desert. They took it with them, and it was the focal point for where God resided in the midst. They could go there, they could bring their korbanos. So we loosely, badly translate that as a sacrifice. But it's not really. Maybe an offering, perhaps. But what is it that God is calling Moses? So God calls Moses, and he speaks to him to the tent meeting. He says, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when a man among you brings an offering to Hashem from animals, from the cattle or from the flock, shall you bring your offering." And then now the rest of this Torah portion is about the different offerings and the Aaron and who can bring the offerings and what the offerings are and what they are for. And you could say this is very dry material, fine. But let's take a bigger picture and talk about what it means to bring an offering. So the non-Hebrew word for an offering or for what we're doing is a sacrifice. And so the Hebrew word is a korban. And the root of the word for korban is to come close, The Hebrew word is to come close. What the Jewish people are doing by bringing their animals or bringing their other offerings is they have an attempt to come close to God. That's what they're trying to do. How are they doing that? They're doing that by bringing something valuable, something that represents them, right? Instead of me, I'm bringing my goat. Instead of me, I'm bringing my sheep. Instead of me, I'm bringing my, my flour offering, whatever it is, whatever reason. There's different reasons that we're bringing different offerings. Why are we bringing those offerings? We're bringing them because we have a desire to come close to God through bringing that up. God doesn't need our sacrifices. By the way, very interestingly, we talked before about fasting and how when we stop eating, right, we stop eating for a long time, then our soul eventually will leave our body, will die, right? So the eating is the glue. Eating is the glue that holds our soul inside our bodies. So too, the korbanos, the animals that were brought up onto the altar, are the glue that holds God's presence into this world. That's a kind of interesting concept. And we don't obviously have sacrifices. We're not bringing animals to the altar today. But when we learn about them, when we read about them, they're in our prayer service, they're in our learning, our teachings. So like I said, like the little children learn about this first by learning about it and reading about it and praying with we introduce it even on the Sabbath prayers. We have like, this is the offerings of the Sabbath, or when we come into Pesach, we have the Korban Pesach, we have the Paschal offering, right? Where it's in our liturgy, it's in our world that we learn over and over and over again about these offerings that we're going to bring. I don't want to use the word sacrificing because it's really not a sacrifice. It's a korban. Maybe it's a sacrifice from the standpoint of I'm giving something up of myself. I'm getting to a Moses state of being. Moses, the most humble of all men, is somebody who can minimize himself. He can say, I don't have my own desires and my own needs. I'm giving over myself, my energies, my physical body to only do the will of God, like an angel. I'm always like up there, right? We have our bodies and we're hungry and we're thirsty and we're annoyed and we're tired and we're like, our bodies like drag us down and we don't always tap into that which we value the most, right? So what's our scale of values? Like I value my relationship to my family more than I value getting sleep. So I'll get up in the middle of the night and take care of my children if I need to. I have a hierarchy of values. And I think what the Torah is trying to teach us is that our hierarchy of values is connection to God, is bringing God into the world. How do we bring God into the world? So God's saying, here's how you bring me into the world. Here's how you have more manifestation of God in the world, is by you wanting a relationship with me. You want a relationship with me. You're looking for me. I'll stay in your midst if you really want me. And here's how you're going to do it. You're going to bring the sheep. You're going to bring the goat, you're going to bring the turtle dove, whatever you're going to bring, doesn't matter, but bring it with pure intention. The intention isn't to show off. The intention isn't to bring the biggest sacrifice or the biggest this or the biggest ox or whatever. It's within your means, what you have, what you value, and recognizing that what's more valuable than that is your relationship to God. What's more valuable than anything is your relationship to God. I remember once when I was I don't know, somebody or something more valuable. What's the most valuable thing? What is it that we're about? I remember when I was becoming more observant, that one of the things I learned was that ultimately we are all individually like separate from each other on some level, even though we've talked before about how we're a collective and we're all part of the same energy and we're all one, but I have to work on myself and everybody around me you all have to work on yourselves, right? We can help each other, but we're all like responsible for our own growth. Like we have to birth ourselves. When we take women, but the goal is to try to connect people to themselves, right? Because that's how you're going to influence the world. But that's also the next level, is to bring God into the world. Bring God into the world. When we bring these offerings, every single time it speaks about God in this book of Leviticus, of the offerings, it uses a word for God that denotes a God of love, a God of compassion, a God of connection, a God who isn't, creating the world, or like other words of God of how God manifests himself in the world, right? The word used, the name of God in this book is the God of love and the God of compassion and the God of connection. And that's what we're trying to achieve by bringing our offerings up onto the altar. And we bring them to the Kohen, we bring them to the priest, and he, so we select what animal we're going to bring, and we bring it, and we give it to the Kohen. And if it's for something to atone for something we did wrong, then we confess over it if necessary, and we watch the Kohen as he offers it up on the altar. And then there's different categories of offerings. Some we eat, some we don't eat, some we eat with together, some we eat with our families, but there's a process that we go through. There are specific places where where the offering could be. It can't be anywhere. You can't do it in your back garden, right? It has to be in the temple. It has to be, you give it to the Kohen, and it has to be at certain times for certain reasons. So there's a specific goal that we have. We're following certain rules about how to bring these offerings, but the underlying intention, my underlying intention of bringing these offerings is because I want to have a connection, I want to have a relationship with God, and I'm giving something up of myself. I'm giving something that I value. I'm giving my ox or my sheep or my goat or my turtle dove or whatever it is that I have. I'm giving it up because I'm recognizing something more, right? So then one of the responses of the animal rights activists is it's not fair for the animal. Like, what did the animal do wrong? And the Jewish response to that is that that we in this world are an admixture. Animals and people are on a higher level, but even animals have a physical body and they have a life force. And the life force is something that God puts into them so that they're alive. And then when they die, that nefesh aspect of them, the animal force, the animal spirit, so to speak, leaves their body and goes up into the higher realms. And our version of that is obviously much higher, and it's a different level, but it's the same thing. Like, we also have a soul and we also have a body, and what is it that's driving us? So when we're bringing something physical that we value, and saying it's not as important as my relationship to God, what is more important is my relationship to God. That is the ikar, that is the key relationship that I want to foster. Am I able to do that? Or am I saying, no, like my cow is more important, or my money is more important? Like nowadays it's tzedakah, perhaps, like we're giving charity in lieu of, or we're giving prayers in lieu of. Do we take the time to pray? Are we to, maybe now some people are really, really busy, and there are a lot of busy people right now, I know that, but many people are not as busy as they used to be because we have less distractions, we have less places to go, we have less ways to distract ourselves. So perhaps we could take a little bit more time to pray, because the desire is to connect to God. Maybe one of the advantages of having more time is that I can focus in what it is that I think is important. Go back to the near-death experience that we talked about before. Go back to the fact that we are all faced with up close, front and center, our own mortality, the mortality of all the people around us, the mortality of our friend's parent, or this person in Italy, or this person in England, or this person, like, I know so many people who are sick, and I know them personally, and there by the grace of God go I. Right, so it's a different level of death being in our face, and then say, okay, I could be fearful of that and run about being crazy, or I can say it's going to happen one day. It's going to happen one way or the other. I hope it doesn't happen now. I hope it doesn't happen to anybody. Anybody ever anywhere. But what will happen? Are we afraid of death? And let's not be afraid of death, because if we're afraid of death, that's going to consume us. If we're not afraid of death, then we can live more fully now. We can live today. There was an amazing little WhatsApp video going around that Natan Sharansky put out. If anybody wants it, I'll send it to you. And he speaks about what it was like for him. Natan Sharansky was a refusnik in Russia at the time where it was not permissible to be Jewish and to engage in Jewish practice, and he was put in jail, and he was in solitary confinement for 8 years, I think in the Gulag, and he sent out a little video, 5 points how to survive isolation. What he did when he was literally in solitary confinement for 8 years, I think. But one of the things that he says is that he didn't know when he was in jail if he would ever be released from jail. Like it was 100% possible that he would be in jail the rest of his life, and he had no idea. but he was in jail and he was alive. And so how was he going to get through without sort of projecting, one day I'll be free, one day I'll be free? He said what buoyed him and what gave him the energy to get through each day or whatever, I'll send it to you, was trying to live that day. What do I do today? How do I live fully today? What do I do today? And I think that's a message for us also. Like, how do we fill our days? What are we doing when we have more time? How are we spending our time? Are we learning more? Are we working on ourselves? Are we trying not to be angry at the people that we're living with? Are we, whatever it is, I don't know. Are we picking up the phone and calling somebody? Are we, what's important? Like a lot of the things that we might have thought are important, we don't have access to those things anymore. So now we have to regroup and reframe. And like I heard someone phrase this as like, God is setting a reset button. There's a reset button going on in the universe. And how do we each one of us, how do we learn whatever we have to learn? Each one of us has to learn and can learn from this experience. It says that the world, in Pirkei Avos, in the ethics of our fathers, it says that the world stands on three things. It stands on Torah, like learning. It stands on avoda, prayer, or the service in the temple that we now can no longer do, but we can still read about it and we can speak about it, but we can't actually do it. But that's one of the things that the world stands on. It stands on our prayer, our desire to come close to God. That was the whole point of the Korban. The Korban, the root of the word Korban, is closeness to God. I am seeking, or am I not seeking closeness to God? And if I am, then I'm going to look for ways to get close to God. And one of the ways of being close to God is learning Torah, is being godlike, like I said, and doing the commandments, doing the Pesach Seder. We're coming up 2 weeks from tomorrow night will be the Passover Seder, and presumably everybody is going to have a different Seder than the one that they imagined they were going to have. Many people were going to go away. Many people were going to have their families come. Many people were going to congregate with guests and friends. And it says in the Haggadah, all who are hungry, come and eat. We're going to have a communal Seder. We're going to invite all the people that we know and love, and all the people that come every year. We're going to have our 25 people. We're going to have our 10 people. Whatever we're going to have, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be 2 people, 3 people, 1 person. I don't know. I mean, that's interesting, what we are faced with, that we're faced with a different kind of a Passover Seder than we imagined that we would have. And can we take advantage of it? I think, we have a choice, and we're going to be somber and, it's like, and angry and negative about it. Or can we actually see this as an opportunity to really spend quality time with ourselves? It says even if you're saying a Seder on yourself, you have to say the whole thing, and to say it out loud, right? Don't just, read it in your mind, say it out loud, engage with yourself. How many times do we actually do that when we engage with ourselves and read it to ourselves, or read it to whoever's with you, and back and forth, and the richness of the conversation might be better, and maybe you're not going to be as stressed because you're not cooking for 25 people. You don't have to turn your whole kitchen over. Just shut the cabinets and sell all your chametz, and you're good to go. That. What we can be very minimalist with this. It can be very uplifting. It can be very powerful. It can be very real. And maybe that's what we're asked to be doing. Make this more real. Don't be distracted by all your guests and all the extraneous conversation that's going to go on at the table. Maybe this could be a time where we focus on the Seder. We talk about the lessons learned from coming out, from God pulling us out, and all the miracles that happened in the month of Nisan. We're entering into the month of Nisan. This month of Nisan is a month of miracles. Please God, we should have miracles in this month of Nisan. So we're looking to come close. We're looking to understand that when the Jewish people, when we had a Mishkan tabernacle, when we had a temple, we gave up things of ourselves. We gave our animals. We gave our offerings. We're giving money, we're giving time, we're giving our prayers, we're giving the service of our lips, we're giving our hearts. We are still giving. We're still giving. Even if we're isolated, we can still give. And there's a really amazing concept that God says, I will give you the cure before I give you the plague. The cure before the plague. However you apply that. And I was thinking, maybe I'm not the only one that's thinking that, but one of the things that we know we have in the universe before all of this happened, like a week ago, was that we have this technology. We have amazing technology, online, WhatsApp, Zoom, FaceTime, blah, blah, blah. We have so many tools of online learning, online connection, online everything. Hopefully pretty much everybody has it. I guess a lot of old people don't, but in general, most people have. They have the capacity to connect. So the loneliness that might mitigate the loneliness. It might mitigate the sense of being isolated, and therefore let's use it well, right? We could sit and play games all day, Minecraft, or we could whatever, or we could like find a class to listen to, or we could do this, or we could do that, or we can connect other people. We have Zoom things, we can have conversations, we have book groups. We have a book group tomorrow night if anybody's interested. But that's an amazing thing. We have the cure, so to speak, of the isolation. We have that cure before we're all in isolation. It was given to us before. I think that's something to be grateful for. The offerings that we bought, they were not only because we missed the mark, because we did something wrong, because we did, we cooked on Shabbat by mistake, or we did the wrong thing, and we're bringing our offering to God to atone for ourselves. There's an atonement aspect of it, but there's also sacrifices that we bring for Thanksgiving. There's a Thanksgiving sacrifice that we give because we're so grateful. We're so grateful because what actually are we entitled to? I remember once doing a gratitude workshop with Sari Yocheved Rigler, I think it was, and she did this whole exercise of what are you grateful for, and we did all this stuff, and at the end, the underlying question is, what actually are we entitled to? Are we entitled to our lives? Are we entitled to our health? Are we entitled to our anything? And I guess from the Torah perspective, it's all a gift. It's all a gift. Can we even get to that place of recognizing it's all a gift? And some of us have more than others, and some of us have less than others, and we're all from that perspective have what we have. But it's all a gift. It's all a gift. And then go back to the mortality thing. It's like, okay, I'm not going to be here forever. I'm not going to live forever. How am I going to use my resources? How am I going to use my talents? How am I going to use what I have appropriately and well and do it well and do it so that I can connect to other people. I can connect to God. And I think that's really a challenge for us today when we read about the offerings, the korbanos, the desire that the Jewish people had to get close to God by bringing their offerings. We also can think about, do we want to get close to God, and how do we do that? How do we do that? Like, do we meditate? Do we pray? Do we give? Do we, etc.? So intention. What's our intention? What's our intention when we're bringing the sacrifices, when we're bringing the offerings? What do we intend? Do we have an intention of gratitude and of thanksgiving and of wanting to be better and wanting to grow and wanting to, kind of access that spiritual energy and put more into the world? Like they say that in order to bring blessing down into the world, you have to turn the tap. How do you turn the tap of blessing on? You recognize God as the source, right? When you say a blessing, there's initiatives around my world for people to say 100 blessings a day, right? You say 100 blessings a day. Before you eat a piece of fruit, you say a blessing. But when you come out of the toilet, you say a blessing. When you wake up in the morning, there's a bunch of blessings. There's a lot of blessings, and there are people who are saying, I'm going to do 100 blessings a day. I'm going to put that into the universe. I'm going to turn the tap on of blessing, and it might shine down on me, and it might rain down on someone else. But we have the capacity, each one of us, in our homes to turn the tap. We can turn the tap. We can tap into something more spiritual in our homes, or we can not. We cannot do that. It's our choice. We can choose how we do that. You're listening to me, so you're getting what I'm learning and what I'm thinking about. So we have no right to our lives. It's all a gift. Okay, so now I want to say something else. Many of the offerings have to be brought with salt. We know about salt, right? They have to. It actually says that it all. Let's see where it was, if I can read it inside to you, because it says, "You shall salt your every meal offering with salt. You may not discontinue the salt of your God's covenant from upon your offering, for every offering shall you offer salt." And that's one of the reasons why we put salt on our Shabbat table, why we put salt on our challah. Like Friday night, when you eat your challah, and you take some salt and you put that on your challah. Why? Because it's on the altar. God says put salt on your altar. Don't put honey. It actually says don't put honey. It says at any meal offering that you offer to God shall not be prepared leavened, for you shall not or fruit honey as a fire. You shall not use fruit honey like date honey. You should not use honey. Don't put honey on it. What is honey? Honey you put on something and it makes it sweet so you can eat it. But salt is a preservative, and salt brings out the taste. It brings, like, you put salt on it and whatever's in it comes out more. Like the taste of it comes out more. So salt has a different energy. Salt, sometimes we talk about salt in challah as being something that's like a little bit harsh. It's a little bit like puts a judgment into the equation. It kind of like is something that's a little bit harsh, and it's a preservative. It inhibits like the destruction of something on one level, but it also brings out the taste. And so maybe that's a lesson. Like maybe what's happening is salt's raining down. Like we're being squeezed, and what's going to come out of us, like what is inside of us, and what's going to come outside of us, and this idea of salt should be on your offering. Salt should be like, whoever said, like, I think I grew up when I was little thinking life was going to be like fine. There was never going to be any issues in my life. Everything's going to be perfect, and then issues start happening, and then things start coming. And like if you're raised in a home where you're protected from the vagaries of life, you think that life's a picnic, and it's not a picnic. Everybody goes through struggles. Everybody goes through stuff. Everybody has salt that's poured down onto them, right? Something like that. Just the analogy, like the salt, the idea of salt, and does the salt bring out the essence, or does the salt what essence is it that you want to bring out? Like, are we bringing out good parts of ourselves, or are we bringing out bad parts of ourselves? Like, I don't know, like, I don't know, I was driving the other day and people are crazy. There was like crazy drivers on the street. Like, most people are not out, but there's crazy people driving, or the people that are, I don't know, like, are we bringing out the good sides of us? And, are we sharing? Are we, what are we doing? So I think that's another lesson to bring out. So I'm going to read you something, because I didn't prepare as much as I would like to have. So I'm going to read you something I wrote actually a few years ago, but it very much relates to this week's Torah portion. And maybe we've spoken about some of these things already. This week's Parsha speaks of the service in the tabernacle with all the offerings that were brought, how and when they were brought, and what they achieved. The purpose of the korbanos is to help us maintain the proper perspective of who God is and how God relates to the world. In his infinity, in God's infinity, God is beyond all physicality. God created physicality. When creatures die, they return to their spiritual essence, reconnecting with God. Everything in the universe is in relationship to God. Everything in the universe is in relationship to God. An offering is brought recognizing that all of creation is temporary and is eventually returning to its source. The temple scene was one of blood and proximity to death. This could be me. Changes one's life forever, leads to prioritizing one's life. A sacrifice, quote unquote, implies giving up something that is of value to oneself for the benefit of another. It implies a gift. However, the Almighty does not need our gifts. God has no needs or desires. The Hebrew word korban is best translated as a means of bringing oneself into a closer relationship with God. The offering of korbanos was only for our benefit, for us to come closer to God. Offerings were for atonement, for forgiveness, and for connection and closeness to God, the source of all holiness, a means to become holy. Over and over and over, we are enjoined to be holy. The Kotzker Rebbe explains, every Jew has within him a part of God's holiness, which enables us to achieve holiness, right? So we have a breath of God in us. We have holiness. We have a holy neshama that is holy, that is godlike, that is from God. It's God's breath. Man has become holy because man was created in the image of God, but every person possesses a different soul. Therefore, each person has a different holiness within him. Holiness is a spiritual quality, standing apart, detachment, perfection, specialness, uniqueness, refinement. We are asked by God to be holy because God is holy. You shall be holy unto me, for I, God, am holy. The heavenly image reflected in the earthly image. Our souls are pure. God breathes it into us like a glass blower blowing with his breath. Holiness is a requirement. We are required to be holy. God says, I give you life, I give you food, I give you air. Be holy. Rise up. Attach yourself to your soul. Soul talk. Humility is not, so we go back to Moses, humility. The humility of Moses is not defined as poor self-image. It's clear, objective understanding of exactly who you are. It's a clear, objective understanding of exactly who you are. The truly humble person recognizes his strengths and weaknesses relative to himself, to others, and to God. The truly humble person recognizes his strengths and weaknesses relative to himself, to others, and to God. He entertains no false notions about his place in the scheme of things. Moses was the most humble of all people. It is precisely due to this quality that Moses was chosen as the transmitter of God's Torah. He was someone dedicated to truth and untouched by self-delusion. Moses knew his place. Moses was keenly aware that a person must be cautious in dealing with others. Over and over again, Moses shows himself to be of lowly spirit when interacting with others. A beautiful example is found in this week's Torah portion, which begins by describing God's call to Moses from within the sanctuary. The word used to describe God's calling out to Moses, Vayikra, attests to a very intimate contact. God is speaking intimately to Moses. Apparently, this speech of God to Moses was so loud that the trees trembled, but nobody else could hear it. Only Moses could hear it, because only Moses had achieved that level of holiness. The word used to describe God's calling to Moses is Vayikra, a test of very intimate contact. For while God openly speaks to very few, those he calls out to are even rarer. Calling out, right? Speaking. Do we listen to that small voice? Can we quieten ourselves down? We are in a world that is being quietened down. Maybe it's firing up on the internet, but in general, the outside world is quietening down. Can we hear the voice of God calling us? Can we hear the voice of God speaking to us? Can we hear our own soul speaking to us? Curiously, the word Vayikra is written with a very small letter Aleph, as I mentioned. If we would disregard the small Aleph, the word would read Vayikar instead of Ikra. Vikar means chance encounter, much lower level of intimacy. The Midrash says that this small Aleph was due by the way Moses wrote it. So when Moses was transcribing the Torah, he wrote it small. Moses wrote it small because he was uncomfortable with the word Vayikra, a statement which proclaimed his preciousness in God's eyes. He didn't want to flaunt it. Uncomfortable with the word because he didn't want other people to be upset by the closeness that he had with God. Moses sought to downplay this in a way that did not compromise the meaning of the original text, yet made clear to others that he was still a man of lowly spirit. Moses epitomized the heights of humility. I love that. Moses epitomized the heights of humility because while fully aware of his own greatness, he was careful not to flaunt it in the face of others. So he wrote the Aleph little. So that's a synopsis, I think, of what I've said. Now we'll go into the salt and the honey idea. On the second day of creation, this is great. On the second day of creation, God separated the waters into two. There were upper waters and lower waters, bringing part of the water up into the heavens and leaving part of the water down on earth. The lower waters complained that they also wanted to go up into the exalted heavens rather than remain on the lowly earth. God I don't know if that was recording. So God appeased them by telling them that in the future, the salt that is found in the water, in the lower water, would be offered up on the altar along with the sacrifices. So in the future, the water of the lower waters that was down on earth that didn't get to go up into the higher realms, that the salt that was in that water would be used on the altar. So it would have a very high purpose in this world. You shall not cause to go up in smoke from ever leavening of fruit honey. So I was saying about the verse states that one is not permitted to use honey in the meal offering, while it's an obligation to use salt. Even though honey and salt are both used for flavoring food, there's a fundamental difference between them. Honey itself is sweet, and when poured on food, it provides food with sweet taste. Salt, however, enhances flavor, pulling the flavor out of the food. Salt pulls the flavor out of the food and gives it a stronger taste. It can be added to something bland and can make it flavorful. Put salt on not very sweet watermelon. Amazing. It brings out the flavor. It's amazing. Salt on not flavorful watermelon. The symbolism of the obligation to use salt as opposed to honey teaches us that God wants every person to develop and nurture his own unique talents. This is like a good teacher who doesn't merely put information into the student, rather he brings out and develops what's already there. So the lessons from this week's Torah portion. Be holy, tap into your soul, tap into who you are at essence, tap into the fact that you are B'Tselem Elokim, you're created in the image of God, that you have a capacity and an ability to be holy. Be humble, but know what your skill set is. Again, being humble means that you have a clear, objective understanding of exactly who you are. I don't know how to do that, but do that. Get there, know who you are, so that you can use your skills. I was talking to someone today whose son lost his job, and he didn't really like his job, but he was sad he lost his job. But now he's gonna use his talents in ways that he really wanted to. He's gonna whatever it is that he wanted to do. Now he has the time to take those courses and become that person that he really wanted to be. He didn't really want to be doing that job, and he lost the job, and now he has the time to reorient himself and to take the skills and to perhaps in the end, hopefully, please God, be happier because he's using his talents in his own unique way. Again, back to the calling. Moses is being called. I believe we are all being called. I don't know what it is that we're being called for, but we're all being called. And how do we know what we're being called for? Maybe we have to quieten down and we have to look at ourselves and be humble and know what our skills are and say that I'm good at that. I'm good at that. God gave me the ability to be good at that. Now let me use that. Let me come close to God by the correct intentions, how I think. So we recognize our uniqueness and we're bringing it out into the world, but we're doing it with the right intentions. There isn't the arrogance. There isn't the oh, look at me, I'm so great. I want to get to the place where I'm like Pesach, like matzah, like low, to get rid of the chametz, get rid of that arrogance, get rid of the puffiness, get down. We're all getting down to basics. We're all equal. We're all equally susceptible, maybe not to the COVID virus, but it's all out there and we can equally all get it. It's not distinguishing who gets it and who doesn't. And so those are amazing lessons. So can we be blessed? Can we be blessed? Can we turn on the taps of blessing in the world? Can we try to create more love in the world? Can we try to create a silence for ourselves and for each other, so that we can bring out who we are and we can be more of that in the world. And please God, if we do that and we can open up the taps of blessing, and this can go away. This can really go away as quickly as it came. It can go away if we have the right intentions and we do the right things and we follow. Here's another thing. I'll end with this, but here's a really important teaching that I've seen and I've heard. Rabbi Freundlich gave it over very well in Montreal. But the idea is that God might want you to have a Seder night, but this year He doesn't want you to have a Seder night with 25 people. Right? So you could say, well, I'm not going to feel spiritual if I don't have 25 people. It's not about what makes you feel spiritual. It's about what makes sense for you to do. And so when we put everybody else in danger, if we're all on a boat, we're all in this world together and we're all on this boat together. And if some people are drilling holes under their seat on the boat, we're all going to go down. The idea of social isolation is that we should all separate from each other so we can flatten that curve, so we're not transmitting the virus. The virus is insidious, and we don't even know, I think, how contagious it is. So let's stop meeting and gathering into groups. Let's stop doing that. And when we stop doing that, and when we really isolate ourselves by literally staying home, we are saving lives. And there's nothing higher in our Jewish tradition than saving lives. There's nothing more important than saving lives. We can save lives by sitting at home. So wouldn't we want to be somebody that saves lives? We're not going to run into a fiery building and pull out somebody who's, like can't get out. That's very heroic. It's heroic to stay home. It's heroic not to go out. It's heroic not to transmit and be a vector, and to keep your children separated and keep ourselves separated, so that we literally are saving lives. And who knows what benefit the world will have by our staying home and saving lives. So my prayer for the world is that we heal, that we bring the blessing down, that this goes away really quickly, and that we learn lessons that from this makkah, from this plague, that elevate the world, and that will come out the other side and will be so much more connected and so much more grateful and so much more passionate in our lives.